Week's lesson, Gracie talked about what notes are and the different types of notes, including quarter notes, eighth notes, half notes, and whole notes. Today, I will be explaining to you more complex notes, including what dotted notes are and what 16th notes are. Let's get started. So what are dotted notes? Dotted notes are any types of notes with a dot at the right side. You can do this to an eighth note, 16th note, quarter note, half note, whole note, whatever you like. Now we're going to talk about how to find the value of a dotted note. What I mean by value is how many beats that note gets. So the standard formula for finding the value of a dotted note is taking the original value of the note, so we're going to put an O, plus that same value, but divide that by 2. We'll put this in parentheses so we don't get confused. When you add that up, that gets you the value. Here's a V for value. Yay! So now, what are dotted quarter notes? Dotted quarter notes and dotted dotted half notes, which we will be talking about, are the most common types of dotted notes. So dotted quarter notes are notes that are 1.5 beats long. So how did we arrive to this number? Well, based on our formula, we take the original value plus the original value again divided by 2. So the original value is 1. 1 divided by 2 is 1/2. So this is the same as 1 plus 1/2, which equals 1.5. Simple, right? Let's do this again with dotted half notes. So dotted half notes are notes that are 3 beats long. So based on our last formula, we take the original value plus the original value divided by 2. So the original value of a half note is 2. So this is the same as 2 plus 1 from 2 divided by 2 equals 1 to get 3. Now let's look at a brief example. So right here, I'm just going to write at the top what we have. We have 1 dotted half note. This is just something I'm doing to show you all. You don't have to do this all the time, but it helps when you're first starting out. And we have 1 quarter note. So based on what we just talked about in the last slide, a dotted half note is 3 beats. So we know that this note gets 3 beats, and a quarter note from the last video that Gracie made gets 1 beat. So we know that these two values add up to 4, which works out over here. This over here is called the time signature. The time signature on the top tells us how many beats there are in a measure. So since this is a 4, there are 4 beats per measure. And this bottom value is which note gets the beat. And the 4 represents the quarter note. So each quarter note is 1 beat based on this value. So now that we know that the values add up correctly, let's write how to count this. Because although this is good and it tells us the values of each note, this isn't how you would specifically write out the values when counting. So, based on what we have here, this dotted half note is coming in on beat 1. And since we know that it is 3 beats, this quarter note comes in on beat 4. Because in between here, there's a 2, there's a 3, and then it leads to 4. So, if you were to write out if you were to write out the counts, you would have 1 and 4. Now, let's look at a different type of note. 16th notes. So what are 16th notes? 16th notes are notes that move very fast in music because they only get a quarter of a beat. Generally, they are in a set of 4 and add up to 1 beat. Of course, it varies on the song, but generally they are in a set of 4 or in a set of 2. So now let's look at how to count them. Based on this last slide, there are quarter beat per 16th note. So each of these notes are their own unit. So this is 1 note. This is 2 notes. This is 3 notes. This is 4 notes. So each one is its own note. So based on that, we know that it's 1/4 for each one. And when added up, equals 1 beat. So the way that we generally count this is different from an eighth note. Eighth note is 1 and 2 and. So if I were to write that out at the top, 1 and 2 and. That's if we had eighth notes up here. I'll just draw it in for reference. So those are my eighth notes. Not the best, but it's okay. So now, since 16th notes move faster, we write them out a different way. This is 1 E and A. 1 E and A, 2 E and A, which moves a lot faster than 1 and 2 and 1 E and A, 2 E and A. Can you hear the difference? I hope you can, because this is very crucial when learning more notes and how to eventually read music. So now let's do a really complicated example, combining topics from last video and this video. So right here, I'm just going to write what we have. We have 2 16th notes. We have 1 dotted half note, and we have 1 eighth note. The E represents eighth note. So, if we were to write out just the values of each note, this is 1/4, 1/4, this is 3, and this is 1/2. So if we were to add all of these together, we get 4. And this works out with our value up here. So we know that there are 4 beats in the measure. Now, we have to write out the counts. So this is something that you use when reading the music. Based on our slide up here for 16th notes, it goes 1 E and A, 1 E and A, 2 E and A. So since this is the last half, we're only writing and A. And since this is half a beat, these two combined, so right here, this note, this dotted half note, is coming in on the and of 1. So we will write that down here. You don't need to write the 1, you can just write and. But I'll put the 1 in parentheses, just so that we remember. And since we know that this dotted half note is 3 beats, this leaves us with the 8th note, which comes in on beat 4. So if you were to write this out, I'll just erase all this for now. If you were to write this out on your music or whatever you're writing on, you would write and 4. It sounds a little goofy, but it makes sense, especially if you're going to be reading and clapping along. This helps you identify how the music is supposed to sound. So today, we covered dotted quarter, dotted half notes, since they are the most common types of dotted notes, how to find their value, and how to count them. Also, this is something to keep in mind that their value and how to count them does differ. We learned that in this example, because although this might be the value, this is how you would count them. And then we looked at 16th notes, and mainly how to count them.